Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar on the call topics. Today, we're going to be doing the call topic, as you can see in front of you, the access and integration of heterogeneous health data for improved healthcare in disease areas of high unmet public health need. So today, just before we start, we're going to be recording this webinar. It's going to be published on the IHI website. So if you know anybody that would be particularly interested, they can watch it after the fact. And if you, in fact, miss anything, no problem. Check out the website. It'll all be up. Slides, webinar, participant list is also published if you wish to be published. So the question was asked whether or not you want to be on the website, and we will put you up. So one thing that I think bears repeating on every single webinar is that all information regarding future IHL call topics is indicative. So it is subject to change. So the final information about future IHI calls is going to be communicated after full approval by the governing board. So always keep that in mind, and we should be fine for that. I should say on the housekeeping, you can ask questions. You see there's a chat box there. We have just a couple people who have spoken. You can ask questions anytime in the chat box, and Colin will get to it. On that message, the people that are here, Colin is going to give the presentation. He is an excellent and talented scientific officer, so we are excited to hear from him. We have Catherine Brett here from the comms with me, and the legal team is also, I see Desmond and maybe some others will pop in. So everybody's here to answer your questions to make sure that you have the most informative webinar possible. So this webinar, I think one thing that I want to just finish with is this does not cover the rules and procedures, which I know every time we do a webinar, this is one of the questions that keeps coming up. It won't cover the rules and procedures, but luckily we did in fact already do a long and very detailed by Desmond Berry, our legal officer, a webinar for you to watch, and you can see the slides. Any other questions you can send to infodesk@ihi.europa.eu. One thing that's new that you might have seen on the website is that we will have a webinar on the financial aspect of making an application. So that will be on the 27th. So make sure to register that, as you can see, to preparing the proposal budgets. Well, that's enough from me. So as I say, ask all of your questions, and we'll put it over to Colm, who will give you your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. So my name is Colm Carroll, and I'm a scientific officer at the IHI, and I'm the scientific officer following this particular topic. As Tom said, in this webinar, I'm going to cover various things about the topic, but I'm going to start by introducing IHI for those of you who are not familiar with the program. And then on the topic itself, I'll go through some various aspects, including the challenge, why we think it's a topic that should be funded under IHI, and then the scope, the expected outcomes and impacts, and finally a little bit on the budget. And then to finish the webinar, I'm going to give you some tips on how to submit a high quality proposal, a little bit about how the evaluation works, and finally some tips on identifying consortium partners, which is crucial in IHI projects. As Tom mentioned, I won't go through these last two bits. We will not cover the rules and procedures, but I think on previous webinars, there's been quite a few questions on the budgets. So I will refer most of those questions to the webinar next Monday, although we can, of course, give some answers already after this webinar. Okay. So a little bit on the IHI itself, and I guess some of you on the webinar are familiar with the Innovative Medicines Initiative. And that is, that gives us a firm basis for IHI. But I think the important thing to know about IHI is that we are a new organization. We are a new partnership for health. And we're a public-private partnership between the European Commission, the European Union, represented by the European Commission, and various healthcare industry associations who are listed here. And those are COSIR, who are very much focused on imaging, radiotherapy, health IT, and some electromedical industries. FPA and Vaccines Europe, who are focused on pharmaceutical and vaccine industries, Europa Bio, representing the biotechnology industry, and finally MedTech Europe, very much focused on MedTech, diagnostics, electronic healthcare records, etc., etc. And the idea behind IHI is that we address some healthcare challenges that could not be addressed by individual sectors working by themselves. So we think that by combining forces, all these different sectors here on the screen working together, we can achieve things that would not ordinarily be possible. And therefore, collaboration is at the heart of what we do. And it's very important that you recognize that these are the organizations as part of the collaboration. So I'm going to briefly go through some of our general objectives and then some aspects of our strategic research innovation agenda, just to give you a background of the organization. And I think this is important for you for when you're applying for this particular topic to understand the context under which this topic fits. So first of all, one of our key objectives is to take the latest research, the latest innovation, and translate them into real benefits for patients and society. And this is something which has been important under IMI as well, for those of you who are familiar with that, but under IHI, it's even more pronounced. The fact that every project should either benefit patients directly or should have a pathway through which their results will eventually benefit patients. And that needs to be at the forefront of your thinking when you're putting a proposal together. We also aim to deliver, as it says here, deliver safe, effective health innovations that cover the entire spectrum of care. So obviously our scope has now expanded. In IMI, it was very much focused on pharmaceuticals, and now we've gone beyond that. And with that, we're also covering the entire spectrum of care, from prevention of disease, so people who are not already ill, all the way through to effective treatments. And there's a big focus on areas of unmet public health need. And finally, as a public-private partnership, there's also a focus on making sure that the health industries in Europe become increasingly competitive. And that's an important aspect of IHI as well. So briefly on our strategic research and innovation agenda, this is a document which you will find on our website, and I recommend people go there to read it, not just for the topic that we're addressing in this webinar, but more generally looking to the future. If you're interested in future topics which may emerge under IHI, they're all based on our SRIA. And the major focus here is on the necessary cross-sectoral approaches. I mean, this is why we exist, is to put different sectors together, as I said, to address some issues which wouldn't be possible otherwise. So that's a major focus. And then, as I already mentioned, we're covering the whole spectrum of care, so prevention, interception of disease, diagnoses, treatment, and then long-term management. So those are the opportunities we'll have under IHI. And then at the end of the day, our major goal is obviously to have safer, more effective healthcare for all citizens in Europe, and again, a focus on unmet public health need. Down the bottom here, there's emphasis on working at a pre-competitive level. So we're working in a space where the industries involved in our projects are happy to work together, where they're not competitors, but they can work as a collaboration. And again, for you as potential applicants to this topic, it's important you realize this. We're working in a pre-competitive or non-competitive space. Okay, so this is my last slide of introduction. I just want to give you an idea of how a single stage call, proposal submission and evaluation procedure works. This IHI call 1 topic 4 is a single stage procedure. And many of you may be familiar with IMI, where most of our procedures were 2-stage. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on this. So obviously this is going to start with call launch. We expect call launch to happen next week. And once the call is officially launched, then it's up to you as potential applicants to form a consortium and write a proposal, which you will then submit to us. And under a single stage procedure, it's crucial that you understand this consortium has to be the full mix of both publicly funded partners and private partners. And you've got an example here on the screen where we have private partners, academics, contributing partners, SMEs, healthcare professionals, regulators, and so on. So you have to reach out to all the necessary actors to address the topic and put together a proposal and submit. And forming this consortium is one of the most important things you can already start working on. We expect multiple consortia to form for this particular topic, and therefore we expect multiple proposals to be submitted. Once they're submitted and the deadline, the call deadline has been reached, we then undergo, these proposals then undergo a competitive evaluation run by external experts. And these external experts will then pick the best proposal or proposals. It could be multiple proposals that will be funded. And then those ones that are successful will go through to a project launch phase with a bit of grant preparation and so on. So the key take-home message from this slide is begin forming your public-private consortium as soon as possible. Okay, move on now to discussing the topic 4 in more detail. And as Tom said, this topic is about accessing and integration of heterogeneous health data for improved healthcare and in disease areas of high unmet public health need. So I'm first going to introduce the challenge that we're trying to address with this particular topic. And I mean, I guess for many of this challenge is quite familiar in that there is a wealth of data, a huge amount of data being generated constantly through all sorts of mechanisms that could be harnessed for use in healthcare. And by wealth of data, we don't just mean electronic healthcare records or clinical trial data. We mean that the whole breadth of wearable data, of patient-reported data, patient-reported outcome measurements, patient-reported experience measurements, and so on. Huge amounts of data that people think, and I think most people expect, will be very useful for healthcare. However, accessing this data, when you can access it, integrating it, then analyzing it, and all these steps to actually extract value from this data are extremely challenging. And therefore, that's what this topic aims to address. So trying to put together a platform where this data is accessible, can be integrated, can be linked. And on top of that platform, then developing tools to allow the data to be used for clinical care, for patient self-management, and indeed for future research by both public and private partners. So why do we think this topic should be launched under IHI? Why is a public-private partnership needed to address this? And I guess the first thing to say here is that the data we expect to be accessed under this topic should come from both public sources and private sources. And here I'm going to put a big emphasis on the private sources. We know there's various projects out there accessing public data from hospitals, etc. But here we really want to take advantage of the platform that IHI offers to include private sources as well. And therefore, there's an expectation in this topic that consortia will have access to both these data sources. And then the expertise needed to handle this type of challenge. This is not an exclusive list, of course. You may, in your consortium, want to bring additional expertise, but we'd expect patients to be involved because obviously it's patient data we're looking at, and patients would be end users of some of the tools developed as well. So I think it's important to have patients involved. And likewise, healthcare professionals, we want some clinical decision support tools to be generated to address the needs of healthcare professionals, and therefore having them on board as well would be quite important. And then, of course, for a very data-centric topic such as this, would have data specialists, academic researchers or SMEs focusing on data. And of course, then the pharmaceutical and medtech industries, who would both bring some of this private data that we expect to have, but also be the people who may use the outputs of the project in terms of the platform for their own future research or for developing tools for patients and healthcare professionals, etc. And bear in mind, again, under IHI, this cross-sectoral aspect is quite important. So on the scope of the topic, and this slide is a little bit busy, so I'll go through it by bullet point by bullet point. The first thing we expect applicants to do is to identify a disease area or disease areas of high unmet public health need and justify the choice. And then for that particular disease area or disease areas, these different bullet points should be carried out. So first of all, develop or further develop a scalable open platform for the integration of all these different diverse data types from public and private sources, but also the big diverse data types already mentioned. And there's a focus on trying to bring in data which has not previously been integrated. So we're ambitious here. We want you to be challenged, and we want you to go beyond what's being done before. I'll just focus a little bit here on the idea of further developing a platform. So we've included develop to allow people to be open to choose what they want to do, but we understand there's a lot of platforms already out there which may be suitable starting points to the work here. And I think we'd want people to build on what's already been done rather than start from scratch. Now, if you think it's necessary to start from scratch, that's fine, but you would need to justify your choice. Then on the second bullet point, as already mentioned here, we want you to develop or further develop tools focused on the needs of patients. The third bullet, clinical decision support systems for healthcare professionals so they can obviously treat their patients more appropriately. And then what we want you to do is also then demonstrate how the platform is of benefit to these end users through a use case. And I guess the idea behind this particular point is to encourage the uptake of the results of the project beyond the immediate participants in the project. So, part of this is demonstrating the value, but it's also a big outreach element to showcase to others that, yes, this is something which is worthwhile taking up in your own practice or whatever. And likewise, this fifth bullet, so we want the widespread applicability and scalability of the platform and tools to be an element that you consider when putting your, when carrying out your work. And what we mean by this perhaps is that data sources which are not harnessed as part of the project could be brought in later on in the project or after the project finishes. And so in other words, the tools developed are not just focused on the immediate data in the project, but they're more generic and more open for others to use afterwards and to build on top of. And the last bullet point, and this is also extremely important, is that you should aim to facilitate long-term access and reuse of the data that is accessed through the project. And this could be for research use by anyone essentially, especially perhaps by the industry partners, and also for the needs of the patients and healthcare professionals, etc. So then just to move on to the focus on the expected outcomes, and just to remind you that outcomes are kind of medium-term results, the medium-term impacts, I should say, well, outcomes. And these are perhaps something which will be realized towards the end of the project or shortly thereafter. So these outcomes are, based on what you've already seen. We expect researchers, including industry stakeholders, to have access to these diverse data in a format that they can easily use, so that they can then carry out further research based on this. And also the tools that are being used to integrate this data that they can perhaps then apply to other data sets. And for citizens, and I think here we mostly mean patients, but citizens generally, the tools that are generated are expected, they're expected to be able to use them to support their own disease self-management. And also then for the healthcare professionals, as already mentioned, these decision support systems should be something they should be able to access at the end of the project or shortly thereafter. And then moving on to impacts, and these are longer term, so these are not kind of immediately based on the project results, but will come afterwards. And as mentioned, you as applicants should already be thinking about these impacts when you put your proposal together, and think about the pathway for how the results of the projects will eventually have the impacts that we expect, as illustrated in this slide. And these impacts are based on some of the elements in the IHI Strategic Research Innovation Agenda. So first of all, we expect the data to be able to use to speed up the development of products and services and tools, etc., across the whole healthcare pathway. And as I mentioned already, we want wider availability of interoperable and quality data, and not just the data that's harnessed during the project, I would say, but the tools that are developed in the project, as I said, should be applicable more broadly, and therefore allow wider availability of data that is not necessarily accessed through the project. And then the whole analytical AI element of the project, which should help result in these clinical decision support systems, and then allow for personalized health for end users, and then of course then demonstrating the added value of digital health and the AI tools more generally as well, which is something we expect from a lot of our projects. So in this particular topic, there are some other important considerations that you should bear in mind when you're putting your proposal together. So I've already emphasized the first bullet point here already, but as I said, given the amount of work that's already been done in this particular area, building on existing solutions, I think, is something you should definitely bear in mind when putting your proposal together. Crucially for this particular topic, which is very data intensive, relies on accessing these broad types of data I mentioned, you as applicants will need to convincingly demonstrate to the evaluators that you will have access to sufficient diverse data to carry out the objectives of your proposal. And it's very important you provide convincing evidence that you have this access, because it's an important element of the evaluation. And finally, this topic is obviously not the only one working in this particular space. This is a very exciting area to work in. And therefore, we expect successful projects to collaborate with various other initiatives that are out there. The European Health Data Space is obviously a very important one when it becomes more operational, but also there are various other initiatives there as well. I think it's important to reserve some resourcing to do this. And as I said, we may fund more than one project in this area, in which case we may ask projects to collaborate with each other, maybe through a meeting once a year or something, just to keep each other up to date on what the activities of the projects are. So this slide is on dissemination, exploitation, and communication, which are extremely important elements of every project. Because we want our projects to be seen as kind of catalysts for what comes afterwards. So a project shouldn't be viewed as just a small, standalone, time-limited effort. It should be seen as part of a continuum, and therefore what comes after the project is extremely important. And therefore making sure that end users or people who would take up the results to ensure you deliver the impact that we expect, making sure they're aware of what the project has done is very important. And therefore these elements of dissemination, exploitation, and communication are something we want you to focus on as well. And therefore in your proposal, and you'll see this in the proposal template, you're expected to describe the activities in these areas that you're planning, what the end users, the target groups you're going to address are, and of course then reserve sufficient resources for these activities to ensure that you will be able to have that long-term impact that we're looking for. Okay, so a little bit on the budget and duration. So the total umbrella budget public funding available for this topic is about 40 million. And we expect to fund approximately 2 projects on this. So you're thinking of 20 million public funding per project. Now, under IHI single stage topics, you need to be aware that for the total project budgets, this is the public funding plus the private funding, we expect to have at least 45% of the total budget coming from these private members or contributing partners. If you do not have 45% of these private contributions, then your project will not be eligible and will not even be evaluated. So this is a crucial point when you're putting your consortium together. You must make sure you have partners who can bring private funding. And I think, if you're looking for 20 million public funding, I think the private funding to match that is about 16.5 million or so. So total project budget therefore would be 36.5, 37 million or so. For duration, we're asking you to suggest a duration which is suitable for the activities you're proposing. And I think on previous webinars, we've had a lot of questions on the budget. So this is kind of a very simple, very simple example of the budget. And here, the reason we put this slide up is to emphasize that the so-called public partners, and here I include, SMEs who are obviously private companies, but they're categorized under the public partners. The expectation is that your full costs are covered by the IHI grant. Okay, so for a project, we're asking for 20 million of IHI funding. The full cost of the public partner should be covered by this. And then you would need private members or contributing partners that would bring in that 45%. So here I've put, we're a public-private partnership. The expectation is 50-50 matching. So here I put 20 million coming from the private partners and contributing partners as well. Now, as I said, this is a very simplified example budget. There are a lot of other permutations possible, and I would ask if you want to have further questions on this, I think the best place to go is the webinar next Monday. Although if there are burning questions, perhaps we can address them later on. Okay, I have a few slides on how to submit a proposal, and how to be as successful as possible in the evaluation, and then tips for how to find applicants. So I'll start with the proposal template. So when the call is launched, I recommend you go straight into the European Commission Funding and Tenders portal and download the templates you need to submit your proposal. And there you will find that there's the proposal template is made of Part A, Part B, and Annexes. Part A is actually web forms, and it's mostly administrative data. I still think it's important for you to go in there, look there and see what type of data is needed so that there's no surprises. And when you're getting towards the deadline, you're already aware of what you need to do. But the most important element here is probably Part B, which is the narrative part of your proposal. It'll be uploaded as a Word document or a PDF. And this is divided into three main sections. So a section on excellence, basically your ideas, what you're going to do, impact, as mentioned, what's the impact of your work going to be, including how that impact is going to be achieved, and then quality and efficiency of the implementation, which very much it's kind of work packages on the detail of the work you're proposing to do. Our main advice on this is this proposal template has kind of instructions on what to put in each section. We recommend you read these instructions very carefully. The instructions are there for a reason. They're to guide you on how to put together the best proposal possible. So please read them carefully and do address the points that are in your proposal template. The proposal also requires some annexes, and again you will find these in the portal. So participant types, which is to do with the private partners mostly. Budget details, again about the private funding. We need to know this. As I said, it's an eligibility criterion, so make sure you complete this. And then for clinical studies, there's a template where we're asking you for further detail on the clinical studies you're planning to run. I have two slides here on the evaluation criteria. So this is what the evaluators will use to assess your proposal. I'm not going to read these in detail. You can obviously view these later on the slides will be shared. I just put them here just to emphasize that we ask the evaluators to go through these very carefully and compare your proposal to these criteria and to score your proposal against these criteria. So it's very important for you as applicants to make sure that your proposal addresses these criteria, and you should make it easy for the evaluators to be able to use these criteria against your proposal. Now you will see there's excellence, impact, and on the next slide, quality and efficiency of the implementation. So the evaluation criteria directly map to the proposal template. So if you follow the guidance in the proposal template, you should already be addressing these, but I think it's important just to be aware of these criteria at the same time. Okay, so I'm just going to finish with two slides on tips for applicants and how to put together a strong consortium and how to submit a good proposal. So first of all, the advice is to read all the call relevant material, and here especially the topic text. Read the topic text once, twice, 3 times. Make sure you understand it. It's not a very long document. The language is relatively straightforward, but make sure you understand it, because again, the evaluators will use this as part of the evaluation to see, are you addressing the elements in the topic text? So as Tom said, the call is not launched yet, so I've put 2 links at the moment. So the draft topic texts are available under future opportunities. Second link there. As soon as the call is launched, then the final drafts will be available under open calls. Now there are very slight changes between the current draft on the website and the final one. So the ones you can currently access are already pretty good. So I think you could use that to put your initial ideas together. Second tip is form your consortium early. So if you haven't already started doing so, I suggest you start today, in other words. And when you're doing this, please always think of the public-private partnership concept. That is why we exist. And that is, we think public-private partnerships, public-private consortia are needed to address the challenges that we raise adequately. And of course, you do need these private partners to bring the in-kind contribution. I think I've already emphasized the third point quite a bit. Obviously, it's something that we think is quite important, so we emphasize it here again. But make sure you're thinking about the evaluation and how an external panel of evaluations will view your proposal. And finally, again, thinking of impact. If you think you may have regulatory impacts, please consider emphasizing those in your proposal as well. And finally, as putting together a consortium is such a crucial element of applying to IHI topics. We have various different mechanisms for you to identify suitable consortium partners. So first of all, I think that it should be based on your own contacts, your existing network. Reach out to them, be proactive. You can also use the webinar participants. As Tom said, the list of people who've given us permission to share their names will be circulated. And also we held a brokerage event last week where people volunteered some information on which topics they're interested in collaborating in. So I suggest you go to that as well, and you'll find, hopefully that'll help you find people who are looking for partners who can bring some expertise to your consortium. In the funding and tenders portal, there is a partner search tool, again, where people upload their expertise and what they're looking for. So it's another source of potential partners. Under IHI, we have national contact points, what we call our states representative group. Their job is to help you put together consortia and submit credible proposals. They generally have good expertise in IHI. So I would definitely reach out to them. If you click on that link or go to the QR code for them, you'll see their contact details. Finally, of course, you can use your own social media, or you can use the IHI social media to promote yourselves and help others become aware of what you can bring. I think the top tip here for finding project partners is to be proactive. You cannot wait for people to come to you. You have to go out, reach out to them. And the earlier you do that, the better. So I think that's my last slide. So I think we can stop here. And I know I've seen a lot of questions have been coming in while I've been talking, so perhaps we can begin to address some of those.
Yeah, thank you very much, Com. I think it was a very useful presentation for everybody, and you can see that some questions are coming in already. So to start with, the first question it's regarding the data to be integrated in the project. So can we generate new data for this topic, or should we only use data already generated or data currently generated on already funded projects?
I mean, I think the aspect here is more about integrating existing data that, although, there is we want you to demonstrate the value of this, and that perhaps, it's not necessarily a study that's going to be generating data at a patient level. It's more about demonstrating the importance of the outputs. So, I mean, while it's not excluded, you can see that in the scope of the topic, it's not excluded that you can generate new data. I think the expectation here is more about accessing the wealth of data that is already available.
Great. I do want to say, by the way, there is the legal team online here. There's both Desmond and Carolina if they are needed to answer any questions. But we'll go to the next one, which is, does unmet public health needs include rare diseases?
I mean, the definition of unmet public health need is quite broad. It's mostly about areas that are not adequately addressed by the current healthcare system. And in that sense, it does include rare diseases. I should say here, there is an element of scale that we want to have in this particular topic. We want to be highly ambitious. You see, the budget is a fairly sizable budget. So we want to be fairly ambitious about the amount of data we're going to gather as well. So while rare diseases are not included, I think you should bear in mind this aspect of scale and address that in your proposal as well. And maybe just come back to the previous question a little bit about the topic that is generated. I mean, I mentioned things like patient report outcome measures and wearable data as well. So there could be an element of data which does come in. So I just want to make sure that, we're about accessing large amounts of data, and whether that's something you can do, through these, it's probably included as well. I guess I'm saying we're not really considering clinical trials on this topic, but other types of data that could come during the project lifetime probably would be included.
Great. So I think this one might have been even covered in your slides in your budget, but we'll ask it anyway for everybody who might not have been there. Will academia and SMEs be 100% funded under this call?
Yeah. So this was quite a common question during our brokerage event, which is why I included that slide on the budget. So yes, the expectation is that academics and SMEs, their 100% of their costs will be covered by the IHI grant. Now, it doesn't have to be that way, but that's kind of the expectation. We could, for example, have an SME coming with asking for only 50% of their costs to be covered, and then the other 50% is their in-kind contribution, which would contribute towards that 45% eligibility criterion. But that would be an exception, I'd imagine. So the expectation is for an SME that yes, 100% will be covered.
Great. So the question here is on sort of the scope here, the focus. Is the focus on one single disease sufficient within a proposal, or should it be a set of related diseases?
So one disease is sufficient. I think one change you may see when the call is officially launched is that we've included consideration of comorbidities as well. So while one disease is sufficient, multiple diseases that I guess are related would also be fine. And the main thing is, I think you should justify your choice of disease or diseases. This will be something that the evaluation experts will look at. And so long as that is well justified and then the work is built on that, I think that should be okay.
Yeah, and the next question is quite similar. Could the topic include a number of related disease areas of high unmet needs, cardiovascular, diabetes, dementia?
So I think, yeah, the same answer applies to that. If it's well justified, there's no reason why you can't.
Great. So a question again on sort of scope as well. So are areas of high unmet public health need only diseases, or could it also be problems in rural healthcare, for instance?
I'm trying to find the exact definition of unmet public health need. So I don't have it here in front of me, but the focus is on areas, as I said already, areas that are not already adequately addressed by the healthcare systems. So it's really up to you to choose a disease area and demonstrate why it should be addressed under this topic. I would advise you perhaps in the topic text, the definition of unmet public health need is there as a footnote, or if it's not in the draft you currently have available, it will be there in the final version. It is also in our strategic research and innovation agenda. So if you go there and just do a search for unmet public health need, you'll find the definition.
Sure. So going on to something that you mentioned in your slides, once it gets more and more involved with this initiative, is how should consortium collaboration with the European Health Data Space work? Are there EHDS entities which are eligible as consortium members?
Well, so you may be aware the EHDS is not fully launched yet. So I mean, that's why in the slide we said when it becomes fully operational. So we want you as applicants to be aware that's an expectation that you will have to collaborate with EHDS and maybe other relevant initiatives, and therefore to reserve a little bit of funding for you to do so. So the EHDS, I mean, there will be a pilot launched after the summer, but I don't think that's so important for now. Just be aware that we have an expectation that you collaborate with whoever would be doing this in the future. And collaboration may just be, it depends on what your objectives are, but it could be just making sure that you inform each other of what you're doing, or maybe collaboration could be collaboration around standards or whatever it is.
Okay, so a question on funding next is any private partner eligible for in-kind funding, or should they be IHI partners?
So in-kind funding is, just to be clear on this, what we mean by in-kind is mostly in-kind contributions. That is where an organization brings their own resources to a project. So there's the IHI funding is us providing cash to organizations to fund their research, and then it's in kind where the private organizations will bring their own resources. So we have two kind of categories here. We have what are known as the private partners who are members of COSIR, FPA, MedTech Europe, etc. And they can bring in-kind contribution. There's also what we call contributing partners, who are organizations who are not members of these industry associations, and they can bring contributions as well. I would say that if you're thinking of, if you're not a member of one of these associations and you're thinking of bringing your own resources, please contact us and we can talk you through the process for how you can apply to be a contributing partner.
Great. So next question is on data sources. So should the data sources cover data of different European Union countries, or could the data be focused on only one country?
So I don't think we specified this in the call text, but again, we're looking at scale here. We want to be ambitious, and so I think, you know, it's up to you really to put forward your proposal as you think best. But I think if you can show that you can address several different types of data across several different member states or regions, I think that's probably better, because that's the ambition we want to achieve, where we can harness large amounts of data to improve healthcare generally. So I mean, there's nothing preventing you going with one country, but again, think about what the evaluators would be looking for.
Perfect. So any comments on how deep the pilot demonstration has to go?
I mean, I'm going to say to you, this is really up to you as a consortium to put forward your ideas and convince the evaluators that your proposal is the best one. So I think that's where I'll say for that particular question.
Excellent. So we actually got a comment sent to us, and I think that it's not a surprise, because it always comes to around the 45% in kind. So I can read it out. Is SMEs, are they considered as private members industry, and they must contribute with 45% in kind, or it's not mandatory for them? Can you sort of elaborate on this?
Yeah. So some of the language around this, I understand why people, you know, we talk a lot about industry members all the time. It's kind of our code for these big organizations that are members of these industry associations. And I understand why SMEs, who are private companies, often can see themselves as industries as well. And therefore they think they're only exclusively through these partners who have to bring their own resourcing. But SMEs can be part of the industry if they want to be, but SMEs are also eligible to receive 100% funding of their costs. And I think the expectation is for most SMEs to do exactly that, to apply to receive 100% funding of their own costs. Of course, you have to therefore have other organizations within your consortium who will bring these in-kind contributions to make up the 45% that is needed to be eligible.
Thanks for the clarification. So the next question is on prevention-oriented projects. Are they welcome in this topic?
I mean, again, I'll just say that I'll push this back on the person who asked the question. It's up to you really to demonstrate that what you're proposing is something that would fit on this topic and something that should be funded. I mean, this is maybe I should have said this at the top of the webinar. There's a big difference between the single stage calls that we're now running under IHI and what were two-stage calls under IMI, in that we're now, our topics are much broader, much more open, and it's much more reliance on the applicants to put forward their own ideas and to justify their own ideas, rather than us being prescriptive and saying what's in and what's not in. So my answer to a lot of these questions would be, you should really put forward what you think will fit well under this topic, and then provide convincing evidence that the evaluators can then use to evaluate your particular proposal.
Very good. So I don't know if we need to go to the lawyers, but we'll bring a comb here. So industry, which are not SMEs, are eligible for funding. Is it possible then to provide in-kind contribution and be funded at the same time?
Yeah, so I've kind of predicted this type of question, and if I go down 2 slides, you should see here that I've kind of expanded what the private members could bring to a consortium. And again, this slide is a very, very simplified example budget. And if you want to understand more, I suggest attending the webinar on Monday. But you can see here the private member 2 is what we'd call a hybrid type private member, where their total costs of their activities under the project would be 10 million, but they're only receiving 5 million. They're only bringing 5 million of their own in-kind contribution, and the other 5 million is funded from IHI. So this type of model is possible, and it doesn't have to be a 50-50 split. It can be all sorts of other splits as well. So, you know, if you're interested in this, attend the webinar on Monday. And again, bear in mind that we do need the 45% in kind for it to be eligible.
Okay, I think that was very thorough as an answer. I don't see any question. Another one just came in actually. So it's would you be able to sort of walk us through the typical high-level process for the call from the perspective of a small and medium enterprise?
Okay, so if I was an SME and I had particular expertise which I think would fit under this call, I would recognize that I need to find partners to form a consortium to put forward a proposal. Now, an SME, there's nothing wrong with an SME leading a consortium and reaching out to partners and becoming the coordinator. We do have SMEs under IMI who have done that, although I would say there is a little bit of admin overhead to do so. Now that's covered during the project lifetime by our funding, so there is that. But I would suggest an SME is probably more likely to join an existing consortium. So as an SME, your first step is try to find out who else is thinking of putting together a consortium. So again, proactive, reach out to people in the webinar, reach out to people who at the brokerage event, reach out to your networks and so on. And then I would also suggest perhaps when you reach out, have people, coordinators of you have to recognize that coordinators of potential proposals are probably getting contact by a lot of people. And therefore you have to package up what you're offering as an SME quite tightly so they can see whether you're bringing something that they need in their consortium or not. So do a bit of pre-work, then reach out to potential coordinators and be proactive. And then once you've done that, if you find one which you think is one where you'd fit in and you think they're going to put together a credible proposal, work again proactively with them. I think proactive is the key term here. And then with them you will write a proposal. So if you go to the IMI IHI website and you can look at some of the projects we have funded under IMI, you'll see what type of consortia we do. So you can see perhaps there's an element of scale here which you may not be used to, an element of complexity. So just be aware of what the expectations are, and then together you will write your proposal and you'll submit and go through the evaluation. But if I was an SME starting out, that would be what I would do as the first steps.
Thank you very much. So the next one sort of goes into some detective work here. Is how many private members do you expect to cover the 45%? Do we know, for instance, the members of FPIA that are interested in this call, or do we need to figure this out by ourselves?
So there's no expected number of private members. I would just say here that, as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, there's an expectation, of cross-sectoral expertise coming into IHI projects. And therefore, an expectation, perhaps a member from the pharmaceutical industry alongside a member from more of a medical technology industry working together with an academic consortium, SME, hospitals, etc., etc. So that's probably kind of the expectation for all projects funded under IHI. And the second part of the question is, how do you find them? Will we know which members of FPIA will do so? My recommendation on this is to go to the brokerage event. Let's go back 2 slides. Yeah, so that top QR code there, if you go back to that, you will see there's a list of hundreds of different participants have put in their expertise there. And in particular, I'd focus on the pitches because there were some organizations who were interested in topic 4, bringing in-kind contributions, and they're ones perhaps who, as a starting point, who you could contact.
Thank you very much, Paul. So the next question is, who can lead a consortium? Industry, academia, or both?
I mean, anyone can lead a consortium. I guess you should just say that they should be from an EU member state or an associated country. But anyone can lead. I would say, the main role of the coordinator from an administrative point of view is to distribute the public funding, and therefore there's an expectation that the organization doing the coordination will be a recipient of public funding. So I think from that point of view, it's probably more likely to be an academic than an industry. But as I said, we have had SMEs leading consortia before, and other types of organizations as well. So there's nothing preventing that, but I think talking to some of our industry partners, they quite often prefer not to be distributing public funding.
Thanks. So I'll just take the next question because it's a question going to the brokerage event that Colin just mentioned. is
Tom?
sorry, Desmond. Do you want to mention about
Yes, sorry, I would just jump in here on that one point in relation to the coordinator, because this is something that we've dealt with a few times. So it's just very important when we're considering the consortia, and we mentioned this a lot at the brokerage day, that if we're picking a coordinator for the consortium, they must be financially stable and financially viable. There is no quicker way to derail your consortium negotiations, and if you're successful, than if there's a problem with the coordinator. So to back up Colm's point, I think the coordinator has to be A, financially viable and financially sound, and B, the consortium, when they're picking the coordinator, have to be completely confident that that coordinator is able to do the administrative and support work to basically make the consortium work properly. And obviously that's a challenge in IHI because some of the project consortia are actually quite big. So this is something to start considering right from the very start. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Desmond. Yeah, sorry, I cut you off. I was just going to answer the question about the brokerage event. They would like to know if when it's possible to see the IHI kickoff event, because obviously I'm sure you want to watch it over and over again and bring your whole family and the popcorn and see especially the pitches and where it's going to be available. So the IHI comms team is heating up all of the laptops and computers here to edit the video and should be up shortly as soon as possible. I will put a link here in the chat so that you can go to exactly where it's going to be on our website. So I'm going to jump to another question here, which is, how about private nonprofit research performing organizations? Do they have to bring in-kind contributions?
So yeah, I haven't dwelt on this. So again, if you want to know more about who's eligible and who isn't, your best port of call is probably the webinar on rules and procedures, which is a recording which on our website. But under single stage calls, there's nothing preventing other organizations applying for IHI funding. Private nonprofit would be fine. But again, the emphasis here is being in a collaboration with partners who are bringing the in-kind contributions.
Great, thanks. I'm going to go. We got another question here. I'm going to go to Desmond. If you can hear me well, we're going to bring you in for UK organizations. Are they eligible to apply as a partner?
Yeah, thanks. This is a question that's cropping up a lot at the moment. So the current situation is, as we know, last year, basically a tentative agreement was executed between the UK and the EU, which basically indicated the UK's intention to associate fully to Horizon Europe. So the approach that IHI is taking along with the larger Horizon Europe framework is that for the moment, UK participants are considered to be fully eligible under IHI projects. So they can participate, they can receive funding, and they're essentially viewed as another participant, just like everyone else. However, this is something that needs to be monitored because we don't know what the final outcome of the discussions is going to be. Therefore, what we are saying to consortia is, if you basically have UK participants, as I said, you can include them as normal participants, but that situation could change because we will look at it again when you're coming up to grant agreement signature. That's when we're actually going to have to look quite closely at this. And then it is entirely possible that if no overall association agreement has been concluded between the UK and the EU, then they won't be able to receive funding, and they will be treated as a different type of entity. So we're trying to adopt the most flexible approach possible in anticipation that the ultimate association agreement will be signed, but it will be a matter of looking very closely at this next year, depending upon how the political situation develops. We're going to, based on what happens in the coming months, obviously IHI will be putting out a notification on this, or there'll be information on the IHI website. So I think if I could break it down into one sentence of advice, it's business as usual for the moment, but keeping in mind that the situation is fluid and that we'll have to revisit it when you're coming up to grant agreement signature based upon what happens in the political realm.
Thanks, Desmond. I think that's the best way to answer that question. There's a complexity to it. We're going to go back to the question on funding, which is, so two projects, Colin said in his presentation, 20 million of EU funding are expected. So what if it goes below or over? Is there any threshold or ceiling per project?
So it's not exactly 20 million, so that the overall envelope available for this particular topic is 40 million, and we're expecting to fund approximately 2 projects. So I think so long as you put together a feasible proposal with a budget that you can justify, then within a range above and below are fine. What I would say is that budgets that are very small would probably not get through the evaluation. So, for example, if you can find a partner bringing a small amount of in-kind contribution, therefore you put together a small proposal with a small budget, you probably won't be addressing the full scope of the topic, and therefore you're unlikely to be successfully evaluated. So I would aim for ambitious, I would aim for scale, and then the budget that matches your ambition scale would be fine, as long as it's in some range around 20 million.
Very clear, thank you. I think I'm going to go, Desmond, just because there's just a comment. If you just want to quickly elaborate on, can the UK partner lead a consortium? Oh, and in fact, there's a hypothetical. If you want to hear it, Desmond, you can probably read, but it's, can the UK partner lead the consortium? And hypothetical, a consortium is led by a UK organization and partners with other European Union organizations. Would all the consortium applications still be at risk? I think you're muted, Desmond. I don't know if you're telling a story here.
Sorry, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted in the tool as well. Let me see if I can break this down into 2 parts. So part 1 would basically be, can a UK entity essentially be a coordinator at this stage? I would say a consortium could nominate a UK beneficiary, and that's very important that they're actually a beneficiary under the rules of the model grant agreement, to be a coordinator. That is conceivable, impossible. I don't see any difficulty there. I think, as I said in my answer a few moments ago, I think the consortium should think very carefully about that, because of what the possible implications of the UK not completing an association agreement with the EU would be. I think then there would have to be a bit of a scramble coming up to grant agreement signature to basically designate a different beneficiary in the project as the coordinator. And I think that would have several practical knock-on effects in relation to, for instance, completion of the consortium agreement by the consortium members. So it's possible. I think that the consortium should think, and this is my general advice, you should think very carefully about who you actually want the coordinator to be, not just if they're a UK participant. But then, if you basically have this UK organization which is partnered with other EU organizations, I mean, that there potentially the benefit that UK organization can still participate in the project. The question just becomes whether they can actually receive funding, and it's more on the funding side that this situation will actually get messy. So if these other relationships have actually been built, it's hard for me to see why those relationships would be at risk. But obviously it depends upon the nature of the agreements that are in place. It's hard to speculate without more information.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Again, I'd recommend people look at the rules and procedures webinar, but just one point on UK. So as Desmond said, we're currently considering UK organizations as coming from an associated country. For all IHI projects, there are eligibility criteria, which mean you must have at least 3 organizations from at least 3 different countries, EU member states or associated countries, and one of those must be a member state. So if for whatever reason you only have 3 countries in your consortium and then UK does not sign the accession, then you only have 2 countries, and therefore you would not be eligible anymore.
Yeah.
So do bear that in mind as well when you're putting together your consortium.
That's a very good point, actually, to remind people of. Yeah.
Excellent. And thank you to you both. Right now, I am looking at the question box and I don't see any new questions. If anybody else has any other questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. But I think this is a good time to, at the very least, move on from this webinar and tell everyone again that the rules and procedure webinar was very good, very thorough, and I completely recommend that you look into it if you haven't already seen it. And next Monday, you will have the financial aspects, which these are a lot of the questions that come out are around finance and rules and procedures. So try and be there for Monday. At the very least, we will put the slides and the video online so you can watch it after. So I want to thank the legal team, the scientific team, Colm here. I want to thank the comms team, Catherine is with me, and the finance team. You don't see them today, but believe me, they're working hard. So thank you very much for joining our webinar. We really appreciate having you here. And if you have any more questions, send anything to infodesk@ihi.europa.eu. Thank you very much, everyone. You have a wonderful day.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, and best wishes with your proposals.